That trailer is gone, and the boat goes next unless you start following community standards. We voted. The waterfront is ours to manage now. That was Brenda Castle, president of the Pinewater Shores Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing in my gravel drive on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard against her hip and a tow truck already pulling my boat trailer down the county road. She said it the way a person says a thing they have practiced in a mirror. She believed the lake belonged to her board. She believed the ramp at the end of Loon Bay Road was theirs to gate, theirs to ticket, theirs to tow from. What she did not know was that the only public boat ramp on that entire shoreline sat on a parcel my grandfather had deeded for ramp use through a recorded easement in 1971, and that the easement named the holder of my deed as the party who controlled access, maintenance, and closure of that ramp in perpetuity. She had spent 2 years fighting a man who held the key to the one thing her whole development was built to sell. If a woman towed your trailer off your own gravel and told you the water was hers now, what would you have done? My name is Roy Adler. I am 61 years old, and for 34 years, I worked as a licensed land surveyor across 3 counties in the high country, running boundaries, setting pins, reading old deeds the way other men read the sports page. I have stood in creek bottoms in February holding a rod while a transit froze on its tripod. And I have testified in courtrooms about where a line falls and why. And the one thing all of it taught me is that the ground keeps better records than people do. A man will lie to your face about a fence. The fence will not lie. It sits exactly where somebody set it. And if you dig at the corner, you will find the old pin under 60 years of pine duff, right where the original survey said it would be. I trusted that fact for 3 decades, and it never once let me down. I retired 4 years back to the place my family has held since my grandfather bought the original quarter section in 1968. A stretch of pine and granite above a cold, deep lake that the maps call Cutter Lake, and the locals just call the Big Water. My grandfather was a careful man. He came out of the Depression with the conviction that a thing you do not have in writing is a thing you do not have. And he passed that down to my father. And my father passed it down to me at a kitchen table with a property map spread between us and a cup of coffee going cold, while he showed me how to follow a mighties and bounds description across paper and then across dirt. By the time I was 20, I could read a deed the way some men read weather. My wife Carol and I built our life on that shore. We raised our daughter in the cabin my grandfather framed and my father finished. And we put a new roof on it together the summer we turned 40. Carol handing shingles up the ladder one at a time and telling me I was nailing them crooked, which I was. She passed 2 winters ago in February, on a morning when the lake was frozen so hard you could hear it boom and settle in the dark. I keep her reading chair by the window that looks down the slope to the dock, and I have not moved a single book off the little table beside it. Our daughter and her boy Sam, who is 15 now, come up most weekends. And Sam is the kind of kid who would rather be on the water than anywhere on earth. He has Carol's habit of going quiet when he is concentrating, which catches me in the chest sometimes when I'm not ready for it. My dog, a blue heeler named Tick, sleeps under the bench on the porch and is named for the way he used to fasten onto my pant leg as a pup and refused to let go. He barks at the tow trucks now, which is new, and which tells you most of what you need to know about the last 2 years. I want to be plain about something before I tell you the rest. I am not a man who goes looking for a fight. In 34 years of survey work, I learned that the ground does not care how loud you are. The pins are where they are. The deed says what it says. You can shout at a property corner all afternoon, and it will sit there in the dirt being right. So when the trouble started, I did what I always did. I wrote it down. I bought a fat manila folder at the drugstore and a legal pad. And I labeled the folder Pine Water in black marker, and every single thing that woman did, I dated and described and dropped in the folder. I did not yell. I filed. That folder is the reason I can tell you this story with numbers in it instead of regrets. The development came in 2019. A company called Shoreline Vista Partners bought up the old Henley Ranch on the south end of the lake and platted it into 86 lots they marketed as luxury lakefront, living with deeded water access. The man behind Shoreline Vista was a developer named Cliff Castle, and Cliff Castle was married to Brenda. The brochures showed families launching kayaks at a clean, modern ramp with mountains behind them. The trouble was, the brochure ramp did not exist. There was exactly one boat ramp on Cutter Lake, the one at the end of Loon Bay Road, the one my grandfather had built with a county grant in 1970 and protected with the easement in 1971, and it sat at the foot of my parcel. Every lot Shoreline Vista sold with the words water access depended on a ramp Cliff Castle did not own and had never checked the title on. He sold the promise first and went looking for the ramp after. I did not know any of that the first spring. The first spring, I just knew that a slim woman in a hot pink blazer and white sneakers came up my drive in a golf cart with the Pinewater Shores crest on the hood and parked it across the mouth of my gravel like she was blocking a runway. She had a clipboard and a pen on a little chain and a pair of sunglasses pushed up into a sharp blonde bob. And she walked the last few feet to where I was coiling a hose with the bright, purposeful stride of a person who has decided the conversation is already over before it starts. "Are you the owner here?" she said, not really asking. I told her I was. She looked past me at the cabin, at the dock down the slope, at Carol's chair in the window, taking an inventory she had no right to take. "I am Brenda Castle, president of Pinewater Shores. We are doing a visual harmony assessment of the whole lakefront. And I have to tell you, your dock is going to be a problem. It is not within the approved community palette." I was 60 years old, standing in my own yard, being told my dock was the wrong color by a woman whose development was a mile down the shore behind a gate I had never driven through. I set the hose down. I told her, level as I could, that my dock had been that color since before her development was a line on a map, that I was outside any HOA, and that I always had been. She smiled. It was not an unfriendly smile, which is the thing I remember most. It was the smile of a person who has decided you do not understand the situation yet, and will be brought around in time. "We are all one community up here," she said. "The board will be in touch." Then she climbed back into the golf cart and reversed it down my drive with the little electric whine they make, and I stood there with the hose at my feet. I went inside and wrote it down. Date, time, what she wore, what she said, word for word while I still had it. First page of the folder. Carol would have told me I was making too much of it. I almost agreed with her. I almost let it go. The board was in touch. In June, a letter arrived on Pinewater Shores letterhead, informing me that the boat ramp at Loon Bay Road was being incorporated into the Pinewater Shores Common Area Management Plan, that a gate and key card system would be installed for the safety and exclusive use of members in good standing, and that non-members would be assessed a daily launch fee. The letter was signed Brenda Castle, President. I read it twice at the kitchen table. Then I walked down to the ramp and stood on the concrete my grandfather poured and looked at the little brass plaque he had set in it, the one that reads public access. And I felt the thing I always feel when somebody claims ground that is not theirs, which is a kind of patience that has teeth in it. I did not call her. I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning and pulled certified copies of the deed and the 1971 easement, and I put them in the folder, and I waited to see how far she would go. She went far. That is the whole engine of this story. So let me lay it on the table now the way she laid it on me. one step at a time, because the count is the point. The escalation came up like a staircase, and I tallied every stair. The first stair came in July of 2022. A man I had never seen showed up at the ramp in a polo shirt with a laminated badge clipped to his chest that said, Pine Water Shores Compliance Officer, and a clipboard held like a shield. I happened to be down there with Sam, tightening a bunk bracket on the trailer, when a family from town pulled up to launch a little aluminum fishing boat. Dad and 2 kids and a cooler. The man in the polo stepped in front of their trailer with his hand up. "This is a member access facility," he told the father. "You will need a Pine Water key card to launch. Day rate is $35, cash, and I can take it right now." The father looked at the badge, then at the ramp, then at me. Because I had stood up, I walked over slow. I asked the man, polite as I knew how, to show me his county code enforcement credentials, because a compliance officer issuing fees on a public ramp would have to carry them. He blinked. He said he was authorized by the association. I told him the association is not a unit of county government, that there is no such thing as a private compliance officer with ticketing authority over a public ramp, and that the brass plaque 18 inches from his shoe said public access and had said it since 1970. He looked down at the plaque like he had never noticed it. Then he gathered up his clipboard and told the family to have a nice day and walked back to a parked SUV and left. The father launched his boat. Sam watched the whole thing with his arms crossed, 15 and furious on my behalf, and asked me how a guy could just make up a badge. I told him people make up all kinds of authority, and that the only cure for invented authority is a real document, and that I had one in a drawer at the house. I photographed the badge before the man left, got the family's names and phone numbers on the back of a gas receipt, and that night I wrote it down. Incident 1. The second stair was the fines. Through the back half of 2022, the letters came monthly, then weekly. $500 for an unapproved dock color. $250 for a trailer parked in view of the road. $750 for failure to attend a mandatory community standards meeting I was never a member of and had never agreed to attend. By the end of the year, the paper fines against me totaled $11,250. Every one of them invalid, every one of them photographed and dated and dropped in the folder. I paid none of them. I answered none of them. I just filed them, because a stack of illegitimate fines is not a debt, it is evidence. And I have always understood the difference. The third stair was the survey lie, and that one I took personally, because it was my own trade turned into a weapon. In early 2023, Brenda sent around a notice to the whole lake claiming that a professional survey had determined the Loon Bay ramp parcel fell within the Pine Water Shores plat boundary and was therefore subject to association governance. The notice named a real surveying firm out of the county seat, Marsh and Holt, and gave a date and a job number, all of it looking very official to anyone who had never read a survey in their life. I am a licensed surveyor. I knew before I finished the sentence that no honest survey had ever said any such thing, because I had run that boundary myself in 1989 when my father was still alive, the two of us in the brush with a chain and a transit. And the ramp parcel sat 440 feet outside the nearest Pine Water corner. 440 feet is not a rounding error. It is a football field and a half. No competent surveyor on earth puts that parcel inside that plat because the dirt will not allow it. I called Marsh and Holt the next morning. I asked for the owner, and I read him the job number off Brenda's notice, and there was a long silence on the line. Then Phil Holt, who I had known by reputation for 20 years, said in a careful voice that his firm had no such job on its books, had never been retained by Pine Water Shores, and had never surveyed the Loon Bay parcel for anyone. I could hear him pulling up records while we talked. The click of a mouse, the tightening in his voice as he understood what he was looking at. "They put my company's name on a survey we never did," he said. And he was not careful anymore. He was angry. The particular cold anger of a professional who has watched somebody forge his credibility. He put it in writing for me that week on his letterhead, dated and signed. And I drove 40 minutes to pick it up in person and shake his hand. And I put his letter in the folder. Incident 3. And the first one that had real legal teeth, because inventing a survey and signing a stranger's reputation to it is not an HOA squabble. It is fraud. And fraud has a county attorney attached to it. I want to stop the count for one breath and tell you about the day in between, because it matters to the end. That spring, Sam turned 15. And the thing he wanted was to take the old aluminum boat out alone for the first time. Just him and a rod and the cold morning. Carol had taught him to fish off that dock when he was 6, sitting behind him with her hands over his hands on the reel. The morning he took the boat out alone, I stood on the dock and watched him motor out across the flat gray water toward the far shore. And I thought about her hands over his hands. And I understood exactly what Brenda Castle was trying to take. She thought she was annexing a concrete slab. She was reaching for the water my wife taught my grandson to fish on. After that, I stopped thinking of the folder as a record. I started thinking of it as a wall I was building one page at a time. Back to the staircase. The 4th stair was the customers, though in my case, it was the neighbors and the town fishermen who had used that ramp free for 50 years. Brenda started having cars photographed and ticketed. She hired a private outfit out of the city to put yellow boots on trailers parked at the public turnout. The kind of wheel clamp you see in a mall lot, except this was a gravel pullout on a county road above a lake. A retired school teacher named Donna, who had launched her late husband's green canoe at that ramp every summer since 1981, came up my drive one afternoon with an envelope in her hand and her chin trembling. Inside was a $400 invoice on pine water letterhead for trespass on Association waterfront, with a photograph of her little Subaru clipped to it. I sat her down at my kitchen table and made her a cup of coffee and let her get through it. She kept saying she did not understand, that she had launched there for 40 years, that her husband Walt had taught their kids to paddle off that ramp. I told her she had not done one thing wrong. I told her the ramp was public, that the invoice was not a bill. It was a piece of paper a private group had no authority to send, and that the worst thing she could do was pay it, because paying it would look like she agreed it was owed. The best thing she could do was keep it, and write down everything she remembered, dates and dollars, and let me add it to a folder I was keeping. She wiped her eyes, and she did it, in a careful schoolteacher's hand. And when she left, she hugged me at the door the way people do when somebody has told them they are not crazy. Donna was not the last. By the middle of 2023, I had 11 separate people who had been ticketed, booted, or turned away from a public ramp by a private association that did not own it. A pair of brothers who ran trot lines, a young couple with a paddleboard, the man who delivered propane and liked to fish his lunch hour. 11 names, 11 statements. I numbered them, and the folder got fat enough that the rubber band around it had started to give. The 5th stair is where the real motive finally showed itself. And it came from a man who could not stomach the thing he was being asked to do. His name was Gary, and he was a Pine Water Shores board member, a soft-spoken accountant who had moved up to the lake to retire and gotten himself elected to a board he thought was about repainting mailboxes and organizing the summer picnic. Gary called me on a Thursday evening in September, after dark. His voice was low, the way a man talks when he is in the next room from someone and does not want to be heard. He told me the ramp annexation was not about community standards at all. He told me Cliff Castle had pre-sold 31 of the 86 Pinewater lots on the explicit promise of deeded boat access. that those sales were contingent on the buyers being able to launch on Cutter Lake, and that the entire second phase of the development, $14 million of paper, would collapse if it came out that Shoreline Vista had no legal access to the only ramp on the water. Brenda was not policing my dock color. She was trying to seize the ramp before the buyer's attorneys figured out it was never hers to sell. Gary said one more thing before he hung up. He said the next board vote was going to authorize physical control of the ramp, and that I should be careful, because Cliff did not lose money quietly. Then he said he was sorry, and the line went dead. I wrote down every word while it was fresh. Incident 5. And the whole shape of the thing turned over in my hands like a stone with the wet side up. Now I understood the tow truck. The Tuesday morning, Brenda stood in my drive and told me the waterfront was hers to manage now. The tow truck was not random harassment. It was the opening move of the board's vote to take physical control. They towed my boat trailer off my own gravel, 200 feet inside my own deeded property line, while she read me a prepared statement off the clipboard about community standards and the safety of the lakefront. I stood on my own porch in my work coat and watched the tow operator winch my trailer up onto his flatbed, and I felt my jaw set hard enough to ache. And I did not say one word, because I knew that anything I said on that gravel was a sentence with no record behind it. Tick stood beside my boot with his hackles up and growled low at the diesel rattle of the flatbed, and I put a hand flat on his head to settle him and felt him lean into my leg. A sheriff's deputy was there, a young man named Wade with his thumbs hooked in his belt, standing off to the side and looking like he would rather be anywhere else in the county. I want to be fair to Deputy Wade, because the easy version of this story makes the law the villain, and that is not what happened. Wade was not corrupt. Wade was constrained. After the truck pulled out and Brenda climbed back into her cart and rolled off down the road, he came up the drive and took his hat off, talked to me quiet, man to man. "Mr. Adler," he said, "I am not going to pretend I am happy about this. The association filed a civil claim of right to that ramp parcel last week, though. And there is a tow authorization attached to it that a judge has not thrown out yet. Until a court sorts out who holds title, my hands are tied on the question of whose ground that is." He turned his hat in his hands. "A complaint gets filed, I have to act on it, whether it is worth the paper or not. That is the job. What you need is not an argument out here. What you need is a clean record and one instrument that settles the title in a single motion, in front of somebody with the authority to rule on it." He did not know I had been building exactly that for 2 years. I told him so, plainly. I told him I had 11 incidents documented, a fraudulent survey with the surveying firm's own sworn denial, and a certified easement from 1971. He looked at me a second longer than a man looks when he is just doing paperwork. Something shifted behind his eyes. He took out his own notebook and asked me to walk him through the folder right there on the porch, and he copied down the count and the dates in his own hand. And when I got to the part about the fake survey, he stopped writing and said, "She forged a surveyor's name." Not a question. I said yes. He wrote that down twice, underlined. Then he told me there was a county commission hearing on the Pine Water Common Area plan in 3 weeks, and that the commission, not a deputy on a gravel drive, was where a recorded deed would do its work. He told me to bring everything. He shook my hand before he left, which a constrained man does not have to do. And I understood that Deputy Wade had just quietly moved from standing behind Brenda Castle to standing where the facts were. 3 weeks. I had a countdown now and a venue, and the wall was nearly built. I want to tell you what those 3 weeks were like. Because patience is not the same as doing nothing. And I was not doing nothing. I drove to the recorder's office and pulled the full chain of title on the ramp parcel back to my grandfather's original purchase. I had the 1971 easement certified again, fresh stamp, so no one could argue staleness. I called Phil the surveyor and asked him to put his letter about the fake survey into a sworn affidavit, and he did, gladly. I sat with Donna and the school teacher and 9 other people at my kitchen table over 3 evenings and helped each of them write a short, plain statement of what had happened to them at the ramp, dates, and dollar amounts, and got each one signed. I called Gary once more and asked him only one thing: whether he would confirm in writing what he had told me about the pre-sold lots. And he was quiet a long time. And then he said he would, because he had not retired to the lake to help a man steal it. 11 statements, 1 affidavit, 1 certified easement, 1 chain of title, 1 board member's letter. I laid them out on the dining room table in the order I would hand them over, and I closed the folder, and I slept that night the way you sleep when the work is done, and only the showing of it is left. There was one more thing I did, and it is the thing the title of this story turns on. So I will tell it straight. The easement my grandfather recorded in 1971 did not just grant public access. I had read it 100 times, but I read it again that week, slowly, the way you read a thing when everything depends on the exact words. And there in the 3rd paragraph was the sentence that changed the whole game. The easement named the holder of the dominant parcel, which is my deed, as the party responsible for the maintenance, operation, and, when necessary for public safety or for the protection of the servient estate, the temporary closure of the ramp. My grandfather, who was no lawyer, had been smart enough or lucky enough to write a closure right into the instrument. The ramp was public, yes. The man who controlled whether it opened or closed, though, was me. Brenda Castle had spent 2 years and tens of thousands of dollars and a fraudulent survey trying to seize a ramp that I could lawfully padlock any morning I chose, and every lot Cliff Castle had pre-sold on the promise of water access depended on that ramp staying open at my pleasure. So the week before the hearing, I exercised the closure right. I did it by the book, the way the easement required. I posted a notice at the recorder's office and at the ramp itself, citing the 1971 instrument, declaring a temporary closure of the Loon Bay ramp for the protection of the servient estate, pending resolution of the disputed claims against it. I had the county clerk stamp my copy so the date could never be argued. I bought a heavy log chain and a good brass padlock at the hardware store in town. And the man behind the counter, who had launched at that ramp his whole life, asked me what the chain was for, and I told him, and he did not charge me for the lock. On a clear, cold morning, with frost still silver on the gravel and Sam holding the other end of the chain, I closed the only boat ramp on Cutter Lake. I threaded it through the old steel posts my grandfather had set, and I snapped the lock shut, and the sound it made carried out flat across the water. I did not do it to be cruel. I did it because the woman had told the world the ramp was hers to manage, and the cleanest way to prove a thing belongs to you is to do the one thing only the lawful owner can do. I locked it. Sam asked if we were allowed. I told him the document said we were, and the document was the only thing that mattered. Then we went home and made coffee, and waited for the phone to ring. It rang inside the hour. Brenda Castle's voice came through so loud, Tick lifted his head off the porch boards. She told me I had no right, that I was interfering with association property, that she was calling the sheriff, that I would be in jail by noon. I let her finish. Then I told her one sentence. I told her the closure was filed at the county recorder's office that morning under the 1971 easement, and that if she had any question about who held the closure right, she was welcome to read the instrument, which I suspected she never had. She hung up. She called the sheriff, as promised, and Deputy Wade drove out to the ramp and read the notice posted on the chain and called the recorder's office and stood there a long while in the cold, looking at a padlock that was entirely, provably legal. He did not arrest me. He could not. The document said what it said. The hearing was on a Wednesday morning at the County Commission chambers, a plain room with folding chairs and a dais and a flag in the corner. The room was full. Word travels on a lake. Donna was there, and Phil the surveyor, and Gary the board member sitting alone at the back with his coat still on, and a dozen fishermen and reporters from the 2 local papers, and Brenda Castle in a magenta blazer at the front table beside Cliff, and a lawyer in a good suit. Cliff Castle had the look of a man whose money was in the room with him. The commission chair, a steady woman named Pruitt, who had been on the commission longer than the development had existed, opened the matter of the Pinewater Shores Common Area Plan and the disputed claim to the Loon Bay Ramp parcel. The Pinewater lawyer spoke first, smooth and confident, and laid out the association's claim of right, the survey, the community management plan, the safety rationale for member access. He said the word jurisdiction a great many times. He referenced the professional survey that had established the parcel within the Pinewater Plat. When he sat down, Brenda Castle leaned to the microphone, uninvited, and said the things she had been saying for 2 years, that the ramp was functionally part of the Pinewater community and ought to be managed by the people who cared for it. The chair asked her to wait her turn. Then the chair asked whether anyone wished to speak to the claim, and I stood up. I did not give a speech. I have heard men give speeches in rooms like that, and the speech is always the sound a man makes when his paperwork is thin. I walked to the front with the folder, and I laid 4 things on the dais, in front of the commission, one at a time, in the order I had practiced at my dining room table. I laid down the certified 1971 easement, and I said this instrument grants and defines the public ramp, and names the holder of my deed as the party controlling its closure, recorded the 8th of March, 1971. I laid down the certified chain of title, and I said the ramp parcel has been held under my family's deed since 1968 and has never at any time been within the Pinewater Plat. I laid down Phil's sworn affidavit, and I said the survey the association cites was never performed by the firm whose name is on it, and here is that firm's owner to say so himself. And I laid down the 11 signed statements and Gary's letter, and I said these are 11 citizens ticketed or booted off a public ramp by a private association that never held title. And this is a sitting board member's written account of why. Then I stopped talking, because the documents were doing the work now. And I had learned long ago that the moment your paper is on the table is the moment you should close your mouth. The chair read the easement. The whole room could see her reading it, her finger moving down to the 3rd paragraph, the closure clause. She read it twice. She looked up at the Pinewater lawyer and asked him a single question: whether the association had reviewed the recorded easement before filing its claim of right. The lawyer leaned to Brenda, and Brenda's mouth opened and shut, and the answer that everyone in that room understood without it being said was no. They had never read the deed. 2 years of fines and badges and a fake survey and a tow truck, and not one of them had spent the $4 it costs to pull the easement at the recorder's window. The chair set the document down and said, in the flat tone of a person stating a settled fact, that the claim of right was without merit, that the ramp parcel was not and had never been within the association's jurisdiction, that the closure I had filed was lawful under the recorded instrument, and that the matter of the fraudulent survey would be referred to the county attorney. I will give you the 2 numbers that mattered, because in the end, this was a story about numbers. The amount the association had collected from me in 2 years of fines was $0. The amount Cliff Castle's shoreline vista lost when 31 pre-sold lots collapsed on the disclosure that there was no legal water access was a little over $14 million. 0 against 14 million. That is the whole gap, and you could feel it in the room. The consequence did not need my help. It fell the way water falls, downhill and according to its own weight. Once the commission record showed there was no legal access to the ramp, the buyer's attorneys did the rest. The pre-sale contracts unwound one after another, each buyer pulling out the moment his lawyer read the commission minutes. The second phase of Pinewater Shores never broke ground, and the staked lots sat empty with their little survey flags fading in the weather. The county attorney did refer the survey fraud, and Brenda Castle resigned the presidency she had held for 9 years rather than answer questions under oath about a document she had invented. Cliff Castle's company filed for protection by the next spring. They had reached for the one thing that would make their development worth $14 million. And in reaching for it, they destroyed the only thing holding the $14 million together, which was the quiet assumption that nobody would ever check the deed. I had checked the deed. I had checked it in 1989 and again in 2022 and again the week before the hearing, because checking the deed is the entire job. I unlocked the ramp the day after the hearing. The closure had done its work, and a public ramp is meant to be open. So I took Sam down on a clear morning, and we cut the chain off ourselves and coiled it up and put it in the shed. Donna launched her late husband's canoe that same afternoon, and a half-dozen town boats went in behind her. And the lake was just the lake again, the way it had been for 50 years before anybody platted a brochure. Sam asked me if we won. I told him we did not win anything. I told him the ramp was always ours to keep open, and all we did was prove it. Then he took the aluminum boat out across the flat morning water, and I stood on the dock where Carol used to stand, and I watched my grandson motor toward the far shore the way she taught him. And I thought that was the only thing I had ever been fighting for, and it had never once been the concrete. So here is the lesson plain, because you came this far and you are owed it. If somebody with a clipboard and a title tells you they have authority over your land or your water or your access, do not argue with them on your gravel. Arguing is what they want, because arguing has no record. Instead, go to the county recorder's office, which is open to you, and pull your deed and every easement and instrument attached to it, and read them slowly all the way to the 3rd paragraph. Because the thing that saves you is often a clause somebody wrote 50 years ago that nobody bothered to read. Keep a folder. Date everything. Photograph everything. Get the other victims' names, because 11 statements weigh more than one. And know the difference between a fine and a debt. Because an illegitimate fine is not money you owe. It is evidence somebody handed you for free. The ground does not care how loud anybody is. The deed says what it says. Verify it against the dirt and keep the record, and you will not need to raise your voice. If you have got your own story of a clipboard that picked the wrong property owner, put it in the comments, because I read them and so does everybody else who has been through it. Subscribe if you want the next one, because next week I am telling you about a retired road engineer whose HOA repaved a private easement they did not own and then sent him the bill, and what he found in a 1956 county road agreement that turned that bill into a confession. Until then, go pull your deed. Read all of it.